I'm John Arnold, Bishop of Salford. Just after Laudato Si came out in 2015, I got a phone call saying, "You're the new environmental lead for the Bishops' Conference of England and Wales." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, you're a trustee of CAFOD, they're most advanced in their understanding of the environment," and the phone went dead. I've been trying to learn ever since, and in a sense, I'm glad I'm not an expert, because I don't want to talk down to people. I'm with people in trying to understand the environment and encourage a response to it.
Sure. Thank you very much. Would you be able to help us, Bishop John, just by explaining a bit more about what it is that you're doing to respond to the climate crisis?
Right. Well, as spokesman for the Bishops' Conference, I think I've got to speak for the conference, and I've also got to speak to the bishops. So the first thing I'm trying to do is encourage all the bishops in a response. So we've got environmental leads in every diocese, and they meet regularly to share good practice and to try and stimulate an interest and some sort of energy for a response to our climate catastrophe. And I'm also trying to enable any sort of projects around the place. Guardians of Creation is something which is now a sort of a national response policy-wise. That's all to do with trying to meet carbon zero through our buildings, our parishes, our schools, and trying to use the land that we have properly, and trying to get basic information about what people can be doing, because as Pope Francis says, each and every one of us has our part to play, and trying just to alert people. I think an awful lot of people are understanding that there is an environmental crisis, but a lot of people are thinking, oh, it's for the politicians and the industry, but it's for more than that, it's for all of us.
Thank you very much, and it's that point about it being for all of us that I hope we're able to get across with the use of this resource, that every little thing that we do counts. I'm going to ask Grace now. I know there's been a lot going on. If you could pick up the conversation.
Thank you. Yeah. Bishop John, I was privileged to be part of the delegation that you helped to organise, or you led, when we went to the Vatican earlier this year to meet the Holy Father, to meet Pope Francis. And it was, for me, and I'm sure for everybody there, a really transformational time. Pope Francis talked really eloquently about how all these issues of eco-justice, social justice, the local and the global, how they all integrate. He uses the phrase integral ecology. Yeah. And I wonder whether you just want to sort of say a few words on that and your reflections on what that means for us maybe as people in the church.
Well, Pope Francis uses the phrase everything is connected, and I think we're seeing that, particularly in terms of climate events. Every continent has been affected, and places that haven't had climate events before have had significant events within the last year. And between July and August, almost every day there's been more evidence of unusual places having unrealistic and unimaginable events happening to them, like southern Europe with their droughts and their wildfires, then their floods and their heat waves. It's just happening so fast. But if you just connect with, say, migration, there are large areas now of sub-Saharan Africa that are not producing the food that people need, and therefore they are moving, and they are moving north, and that's causing increased migration, which some estimates say up to 500 million people will be migrating northwards by 2050, at a time when the north, having seasonal changes, will not be producing the amount of food that it now produces. That's going to turn the tables really on the way that we manage our food and how much food we've got. It also, migration leads into people trafficking and modern slavery in a big, ridiculous numbers that we're hearing about now. It means that when there's migration, established societies that have really looked inward on themselves are going to find overloaded health systems, not enough schooling for young people, that brings mental health problems, and everything is connected. And we've got to recognise that we've got to have a plan which is global, in which everybody is playing their part however small and insignificant it might seem, that if we are working together, we can make that difference. And as Christians, we mustn't lose sight of hope. Even though the statistics at the moment are pretty appalling, we cannot let go of the fact that we need to make those changes and can make them. In the Paris Agreement in 2015, there were some wonderful, wonderful decisions made about maintaining that 1.5 degrees. But all those promises have never been followed up, and every COP meeting since then has acknowledged that those promises were not being met. And we've got some of our best environmentalists saying we're not heading for 1.5 degrees, we're going for 2.5, 2.7, which will just be awful for the world in its entirety. And then you get the statistics now. I try and keep a list for the bishops, which of course they're reading in some detail, but I had a list of 4 pages at the last plenary, just a couple of lines, something like Italy, floods, wildfires, and then move on to, and there were 4 pages that I handed out at the April meeting. Come the November meeting, I've already got 10 pages, and July and August I was adding lines more or less every day. But you get the sort of statistics like Antarctica is just emerging from its winter season, and it's acknowledged that they have less ice to the tune of 3 times the size of France missing. Now that ice is now in the water, sea levels are rising, 40% of the world's population live in coastal regions. It's going to be telling its own story fairly soon. So we've got pretty appalling statistics, and we've got to recognise each and every one of us has our part to play. And at the moment, I think that the politicians are frankly afraid of the unwelcome news and the sort of priorities that we've got to have, and this obsession with growth. Economy must grow. Well, it can't go on growing. We've got to spread the benefits of our economy to everybody. But at the moment, realistically, the rich are getting richer, out of any sort of imagination getting richer, and the poor are getting poorer. Greater Manchester area, in the 5th most prosperous country in the world, we have 42% of children in poverty. How has that happened? Yeah. And I don't want to be dismissive of anyone who follows football, but when you've got a footballer being paid nearly £1 million a week, that doesn't make much sense to me. So I think politicians have really got to be much more radical in facing the truth, and industry has got to recognise that it's not all about profits, and that really fossil fuels have got in some way to be managed. For a good while, Salford continued in its investment in fossil fuels with Shell and BP because we believed we had a voice, and they were responding with some remarkable policies about reduction and greening for the future, but it's not come to a reality, so we are now divesting and trying to do so as noisily as possible to show that these companies are not doing what they should do. I better shut up now.
I mean, that's brilliant. You've set the context so well and powerfully for us all about how it all integrates, and it's all, the stepping stones, resources, one way in which we can start on that journey of being part of the change. And Pope Francis talked, when we met him, he talked about how Manchester and Lancashire were central to the Industrial Revolution when it came about, and he charged us with now being central to the change that we need to see. And just briefly, Bishop John, I just wondered whether you had any thoughts about how we can move people along this journey.
One, I think, is simple handout materials about basic daily things: saving water, eating less red meat, sharing journeys, saving electricity, all that tiny things really, but they all add up. Again, Pope Francis says the biggest dams in the world are made up of drops of water. Well, all right, let's acknowledge we're single drops of water, but if we gather together, we can become a wave and a torrent and for change. So there's that. And also, I think let's remind ourselves we're in a democracy. I'm not thinking too much about the government at the moment. But we have a voice, and we have a voice to our politicians, and maybe by using that voice, we actually educate them into listening and leading us in a way that we want to be led, which is preserving our environment, not just nationally, but globally. We can't just regard ourselves as doing all right so far. We have had droughts, we've got unseasonable weather even in this country, we've had wildfires just east of London last year, so we're not immune, and we are really going to have the impact of other people's global crisis through migration and all the rest of it if we're not careful. So it's that local knowledge, simple. CAFOD has a Live Simply programme. I was hearing about your own programmes too. It's making sure that not only am I trying to do what this says, but my friends and my neighbours also know about the measures and steps that they can take. And I think when we get that, young people have really been showing us by their example. I mean, some people do not like that young lady in Norway. I actually think she's been a good and sound voice, and very powerful. But to see the young people, I went to COP26 in Glasgow, and the young people were magnificent. They were articulate, they were extremely well behaved. Unfortunately, the local press took a dislike to them and said that one of their processions had broken down and there had been arrests. Actually, the arrests had been of a communist group who were trying to break up the demonstration of the young people, and the young people themselves were doing nothing wrong. But to see the growth of knowledge in schools about environment is great. And there's what we've got to do, I think, with the young people is encourage them to see the positives without frightening them about the statistics. I've got a moment, I'll just tell you about a 7-year-old. I went to a school in Burnley, and it was a sunny morning, which is unusual in Burnley, but and it was about 9:30 in the morning, and I got there, and all the school were out in their extensive grounds. And I got out of the car, and this 7-year-old took me around, Bishop, will you come with me? I want you to see our raised gardens. And so he pulled me across and said, well, here we've got raised gardens. They're made of eco bricks. You do know what an eco brick is. And we've raised garden, and we've got beetroot here and onions here, and we've got some herbs down here in the more moist part of the garden. And he went on for about 5 minutes. And then he suddenly said, any questions, Bishop? And I went to the head teacher and I said, it's 9:30 in the morning. I would have assumed that all your children would actually be in class. What's happening? He said, well, they just love being out here. And I said, well, what's that doing to your studies? And he said, it's great. They want to read about the environment, write about the environment. They want to learn the science of the environment. Our literacy levels are going through the roof. He says it's fantastic. And I thought, well, there's the right way of promoting the environment for young people. That they know there's something to be done, they can be part of it, and they're not worried or frightened. That would be not the way to be approaching our young people. But they were terrific in Glasgow, and everywhere I go in the schools, it's good to see. And most of our schools, well, many of our schools have quite a lot of ground that they can be using. It's just mown lawns at the moment, and we can promote something there. Right, well, we're in a very cosmopolitan society here in the Northwest, and we took with us, there was a Jewish rabbi, a Sikh, a Muslim, 2 or 3 Christian leaders. We had a couple of politicians and a couple of environmentalists, but 85% of the world's population adheres to one of the world's major religions, and that doesn't include those wonderful indigenous people who have lived in harmony with their environment for centuries and caused no one any trouble at all. But of this 85%, we believe so much in the same regarding the environment. When I went to COP26, the first thing that happened, I was met at the station by the bishop, and we walked to George Square in Glasgow, where there were 9 speakers representing 9 different world faiths, including a pagan. And they all commented on the promotion of the care of the environment, care for our common home, and then they all made a prayer. And there wasn't a single word in any of those prayers with which I would disagree. We all have that sense of care. We have different ideas about where our universe came from and who created what and when, but we are all united in our sense of being guardians of creation, that we've got to look after what we've got and pass it on in a healthy state to future generations. So I think that is a very good way of collaborating. Now I think interfaith relations here in the Greater Manchester area and the Northwest are pretty good. And this is one way in which we can promote them and make them even better, is our common concern for the environment, and that we can enjoy sharing that priority in our different faiths in the way we're doing things. So the Rome trip was a lovely success, I thought, and Pope Francis was a delight and surprised us all, I think. It just gives us a bit more energy, I think, for what we've got to be doing. So with Stepping Stones, I hope that we're going to have a close association with what we're trying to do in the Diocese of Salford. And I don't know if you know Wardley Hall. I live at Wardley Hall between Walkden and Swinton, just by the motorways. But I've got something like 50 acres of woodland surrounding this house. So we've created a Laudato Si garden, which was just a mown lawn 3 years ago. Now you can barely move for the amount of willows and raised gardens and but we have lots of visitors and you're very welcome. We try to bring in schools and parish groups, and then groups with special needs, people with anxiety and that sort of thing, it's just a delight to see people come. They enjoy it, particularly the young children. They learn so much about how they can live better, more sort of environmentally friendly way, I'm glad to see that a lot of people go away and are actually imitating what we're doing in their parishes and in their schools.
Thank you very much, Bishop John. We could show our appreciation for Bishop John.